Hello, viewers. This is LR Buxton. My name is Lawrence, and I'm delighted to be joined by Alan of the British Sitcom History channel on YouTube.
Hello.
His videos include spotlights on individual sitcom actors and actresses, such as Olivia Colman, Miranda Hart, and Angus Dayton, as well as ones that will be familiar to people who watched sitcoms in the 1970s and prior to that. And also does podcasts about classic shows from the 1970s, from the British comedy scene, like Porridge and Yes Minister, the 1980s, such as Heidi High and Blackadder, and more recent ones, such as Fleabag and Extras. So today, following the highly discussed play edition of Fawlty Towers, which Alan has done a podcast about himself, so he knows as much as anybody, we're going to be discussing a few issues around not just John Cleese's adaptation of his classic sitcom for the stage, but adaptations of sitcoms generally. So welcome, Alan. The first question to you is, as I say, you did a very good analysis of the stage version of Fawlty Towers on your website. Do you think that John was too cautious in using 3 of the original episodes as the base for the play, or do you think it's just giving audiences what they want?
Yeah, that's a fair question because we did do a sort of in-depth analysis of it. I went to see the Fawlty Towers play on the opening night. I wanted to get in there as soon as possible. And yeah, if you go to our YouTube channel, British Sitcom History, you'll see a little sort of, 25-minute or something review of that. Mostly me just sort of moaning about how lazy it was because it is just 3 episodes slapped together with very little kind of connective tissue. And that means you get 3 kind of half-hour, 40-minute chunks of stuff with no real concern for overall structure of a 2-hour show. And yeah, my verdict was lazy on John Cleese, I think. So yeah, I think, why do that? If you're going to do it, then do it. Even if it's just a cash grab, even if it's just, yeah, I'm just going to, I need to pay the ex-wife or whatever it is. Put some heart and soul into it. This is your baby, So yeah, why do it lazily? I don't know, but he's been involved. He's been there. He's been involved in directing it, kind of unofficially. He's been there. He obviously cares. But yeah, I mean, it is very much a retread. Is that what the people want? I guess. Yeah. What else are you going to do? I mean, I would have liked. I'm not saying create a new 90-minute script of Fawlty Towers. I appreciate that's a difficult thing to do, and probably wouldn't satisfy the audience. But you can invigorate it a bit. You can just maybe, even if you've got, I don't know, 15 minutes of kind of new gags and stuff in there, or just doing all the highlights. It's just, I don't know. I will say this though, they managed to resist the temptation to drive a car on it and hit it with a branch. So that was the one piece of limitation they actually managed to hold up.
It's funny because literally I've been in Peterborough today, and literally as I was on the way back, I can't remember where I came across it. It must have been online or something, I guess. But I was going to ask you about maybe they could have done an interactive experience, because over in Evesham, for example, they've been doing a sort of interactive. You sit down and have a meal in the Fawlty Towers restaurant, and then you got Basil and hitting Manuel and arguing with Sybil and etc. And they're still doing it. They are still. For 1 minute, I had to check. Oh, is this not another thing that John's involved in? But no, this is an actual interactive dinner experience.
That's a very interesting thing. That whole dinner experience thing. I've been to one. I went to the Only Fools and Horses one. I haven't been to a Fawlty Towers one. But there has been some legal kind of rumblings about that, because people started doing this. It's sort of an immersive theatre thing. Yeah, you get a meal, and basically the characters, there's a bit of a plot line, but they're interacting. There's an improv with the audience and stuff like that, and they're serving you food. So I'll give you the example of the one I went to, Only Fools and Horses. The gimmick was that it's at the Nag's Head and it's quiz night, and so Dell has kind of come along. He said, "Yeah, don't worry, I'll cater it. I'll do it." And so then he messes up the food. So they promise you this great food, and then they come along, and you do still get like decent quality food. But the idea is it's all gone a bit wrong, and then they try and do a quiz, and that goes. Obviously, it's just kind of classic comedic hijinks. But I tell you what, the one I went to, it worked really well. It was great fun. It was these characters you knew, but it was a new plot, and it had to be a new plot because they have no rights to use the plots and use the dialogue and stuff from the show. So they have to kind of write new stuff in character, but they did it really well. The actors were great. They had fun with it. Pretty good, solid impressions actually of the characters as well. To say this is not West End, this is dinner theatre. Who knows what you're going to get acting wise, but yeah, very solid and a lot of fun actually. A lot more fun than watching the Fawlty Towers play, but and I assume the Fawlty Towers one is the same principle. I know the one I went to, the same company does a Fawlty Towers one, and I also know that there is an official Fawlty Towers one that John Cleese has given his seal of approval and presumably gets, wets his beak off what they're making. Now I don't know exactly what the legal ramifications of all that are. But I know they were trying to stop the Only Fools and Horses ones from doing it, because as much as they don't use the scripts and everything like that, they're using the intellectual property. They're using their characters and the name and stuff. I don't know. It all seems very dodgy. And I think they were getting away with it for a long time, just on the sense of like, someone making a bit of money from it. Yeah, fair enough. But then I think when you're starting to do your own musical theatre show in the West End, and their posters are up on the tube line for this dinner experience, you think, hang on. This is creating brand problems, and we need to kind of stomp it out. So, yeah, I'm not sure the legal ramifications of all that, but they're all still happening. Like you say, if there's one in Peterborough, that's not the official one. There is an official one going on in London at the moment. Although, it's that these companies, they have several casts. They can send them out wherever, I guess.
Yes.
So that's a really interesting point, because I think that is a much more interesting and fun way to engage with these classic characters that you remember. And Fawlty Towers it's an easy one, because you can serve food, you can do a dinner theatre within the hotel restaurant, can't you?
Well, in terms of us getting the long-awaited Fawlty Towers sequel, I mean, I was a few weeks ago, and I'm sure you saw the same with your interest in it, and you've been to see the place, to be fair. I've seen stills of it, and I've heard lots of interviews with John about it. But it's a bit ironic, isn't it, that I'm still not sure if that's actually going to happen. And the other thing is, he was always the one I felt in the Monty Python team that was he got bored with not doing something new. So it does seem somewhat ironic that he's now the one who is doing the very thing I think he always said in interviews years ago he didn't want to do. He didn't want to talk about Fawlty Towers, and he didn't want to be doing the same old thing again. And yet now we've got 3 episodes in a stage show.
Yeah, and I mean, look, the guy's 82 or whatever. Haven't got the fervent energy to be creating new things all the time. I understand that. It's fine. And I don't think there's anything wrong with kind of revisiting old victories. But yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with just churning out a cash-in theatre show. But it was just very uninspiring. And I think that's not a good thing. I think that's going to cause you problems, because people will go and see it and go, oh, that was fine. And then they won't recommend it to their friends, or they won't go and see it again. So I think you've got a much limited shelf life. The Only Fools and Horses musical, that ran for years and only took off the West End recently. It's going on tour now.
Well, that was new material, yeah?
Well, not really. That was a whole mashup of lots of old material as well, just really.
Yeah.
Really hitting the highlights, all those classic bits you remember. But obviously it's got songs, that's new. And it was much more of a kind of journey across highlights of Only Fools and Horses. It wasn't just 3 episodes back to back, which is pretty much what the Fawlty Towers show is. It was a just whole mishmash of bits and pieces that you've seen, but strung together into a continuing narrative that at least made sense. It's still kind of, for me, still hit the kind of same problems over, well, I've seen this before. And I had the same feeling with Spamalot, interestingly enough. And John Cleese sort of said similar things. That Spamalot was it was just sort of, yeah, we've seen it all before. It's the Monty Python bits. We've seen it. It's just some other actors doing it.
That's the problem, isn't it? I mean, the material is so classic and so well known, but it is very difficult to improve on it, and then it's just sort of feeding on nostalgia, isn't it? And people going, "Oh, you couldn't get away with stuff anymore. Oh, let's go and see it before," you know. So
yeah, and to be fair, like the performance I saw on Fawlty Towers, the actors were great. It was a very solid recreation of that, without feeling like, oh, they're just doing impressions. It felt like they had their own energy, obviously kind of quite funneled into this character that's already been created. But you know, it didn't feel like they were just trying to do an impression. I thought the performances were all very good. But it's well, I've seen it before. I watched Fawlty Towers like 6 months ago. I don't, and I said on my review of it, I went with a friend, and she said, I haven't seen Fawlty Towers for years. That was really good. And so maybe that's part of it. You know, if the nostalgia is 20 years old, that's great. For me, it was about 6 months old, so it was a bit like, oh, I've seen it, mate.
Well, and Farce itself, I mean, some of my favourite comedy films were like 1970s farces with Leslie Phillips and people like that. They're great fun, but itself, it's quite. People sometimes look at it and think it's a bit like the Carry-Ons. They're kind of of their time. So, and there was quite a lot of farce in Fawlty Towers. Obviously, there was lots of quick hide, you know, so and so's coming, that kind of thing. And it's a very energetic role, isn't it? You know.
Do you know what I will say, that in the stage play, the episodes that they've used do not really have that much stuff. There's very little in the way of, oh, this door closes, the next one opens, and someone comes in. Oh God, hide! You know, Brunella Scales is coming, and she's going to shout at us. There was none of that really, and I guess it's just the episodes they picked. But it wasn't very frenetic in that farcical sense. It's quite high energy. You know, Basil's jumping all over the place. But actually, it really didn't work for me on that farcical level, on a stage level. And I recently saw Noises Off. They did that at the West End last year.
Yes, I've seen that. Yeah, great.
Play, you know, that is the classic farce of British theatre, really. And it's the first time I'd seen it, and it was great. I loved it, and all those farcical elements, just absolutely nailed on. And all the usual stuff that you expect of that. I didn't get that from Fawlty Towers, and it was the one thing I thought I would. Because Fawlty Towers on TV as farce, for me, doesn't work very well. I think farce on TV struggles because, you know, the beauty of farce in a theatrical setting is that it's live, and you can just wonder at the timing of it and how it all kind of comes together, and it's just like this real kind of appreciation of performance. But in film, in film, you don't have to worry about getting it live, but you can absolutely nail it. You can edit it to within an inch of its life, film everything you need to film. On TV, you've got the worst of both worlds. You're doing it as a live performance in front of an audience, and then you're trying to cut it down. It's nowhere near as rehearsed as a stage show is going to be. You've had 4 days of rehearsal, and so you can't get the timing that perfect. And then you kind of have to edit it, but you're much more limited to your editing because you're still essentially working off a vision mixer. And you know, so and Fawlty Towers was edited to within an inch of its life. And you know, and John Cleese talks about that. If you listen to the commentaries and stuff, they absolutely cut that as much as they could to get the timing absolutely perfect. And so it kind of works, but you're still limited by certain factors. And like the rat is a great example, just because they had to have a live rat and then cut that in with a fake rat, just a rat being pulled across the floor on a string, which you can get away with in a stage show, but just does look so weak on TV. So anyway, I was hoping for more in terms of the stage show. I was hoping to get some real of that farcical energy, and frankly, it wasn't there. And not because it wasn't working, because it wasn't there.
Well, that sort of leads me on to sort of a general question, really. But obviously, you've kind of given one of the answers already in your answer you've just made. What do you think makes a good adaptation? I ask this because on your site you talk a lot about shows like Red Dwarf, which tried to relaunch in the USA as an American sitcom. So what do you think needs to be retained from the original material, and what needs to change depending on the format it's going into?
Well, I think in terms of adaptations to another country, and let's use America because it's the one we kind of know best, you look at the ones that are successful. It's the ones that have kind of taken some core element, but then fitted it into their own cultural experience. The Office is a really good example because the first series of The Office US is a script, like word for word remake of the British shows, and it just doesn't quite work. It's okay, but as a British viewer, it's like, well, I've seen this. This is a bit not quite right. As an American viewer, if you've never seen the original, maybe it works. And then, from the second series, they just found their own energy. They found their characters a little bit more, and it became its own thing. But it still has that core. It still has the same tone, and the set characters. Obviously, they've changed a bit, but it's obviously still speaking to some same shared experience. But the office life experience in America is obviously slightly different to in Britain. So they just needed to adapt that a little bit. Something like Steptoe and Son, which became Sanford and Son, it's still got that core, the relationship of father and son being trapped together in this working class lifestyle, and that was, that's relatable to so many people. And I think ultimately that's all you need. You need to be relatable to an audience, and maybe that's why the Red Dwarf American thing didn't quite work. Red Dwarf's a really weird example because it's one of those things that is absolutely catching lightning in a bottle. It's the early series of Red Dwarf is a lot of messy ingredients that just manage to work, and then they finesse it, and it becomes something truly great. But it only just works in that first series, and it's getting by on a lot of charm and excellent writing and charming.
It changed so much, isn't it? When you look at the first season, it's full of like long sort of grim pauses, it's all quite existential and stuff, isn't it? And then it almost became a satire of American sci-fi, and the problem with adapting it to an American audience then is going to be things that are sort of British and low budget, like changing the emergency alert bulb and stuff, the red alert bulb.
Yes.
It's something that probably wouldn't work in American audiences.
There's something about the gritty kind of low budget sci-fi feel of it that works really well for what it is. And I don't know, the American version, it's not even that bad, but it's and I think if they persevered and kind of worked with it, I think they could have created something that would have worked. But I'm sure anyone who's sort of seen all the extras and all that, when they're talking about it, particularly Doug Naylor talking about it, they just hacked the script apart and were just trying to add in more jokes. And it's like it's a different system in America. They just want to create a product that they can make 100 episodes of. There's not really any love in the process. And obviously the writers who are creating things and coming up with ideas have that, and it just gets beaten out of them, or it just doesn't play in the system. And that's why you get the ones that slip through, the ones that work really well, are ones that work within that system. And the British system is totally different, or certainly has been traditionally. And I prefer it, obviously, but that might be my cultural bias anyway. But yeah, what about other adaptations? Turning something from a half-hour TV show into an hour-and-a-half film. We do a lot of film adaptations on our podcast. Whenever we do a show and it had a film version, we'll look at that as a sort of separate entity. And back in the 70s, it was happening all the time. On the Bus has had 3 films. But, the Police film, a Porridge film. The Porridge film is a great example because I think it works really, really well. It's a great, small to large screen adaptation. And it's not perfect by any means. And you can tell it's been written by people who are a bit more accustomed to writing in half-hour chunks. But the fact that Dick Clement and Neil Frenet went on to write so many films and worked in Hollywood so much, that's not that much of a surprise, is it? But some people, and a lot of sitcom writers in this country came up through sketch comedy and gag writing in radio in the early days, in more sort of sketch show later on, Spitting Image or, all that kind of stuff. It was just, you could just churn out sketch after sketch after sketch, earn a living and gain a reputation. And then you come up with a good sitcom idea and then you have to adapt to a half hour show. So, we see that sort of stuff all the time. So then making it a 90 minutes that actually works as a constructive whole, yeah, it's a tough gig. I think the In-Betweeners did it very well. I'm a big fan of the In-Betweeners films. But that is tough. And in terms of film as well, you have to kind of go bigger. It's why the the cliche is they go on holiday. You have to get them out of their normal environment and into a bigger world.
You're damned if you do, damned if you don't, because often, like, are you being served or something? They said, they don't work outside the store, and Dad's Army tried to make it a more. They tried to put it more in the context of the war, didn't it? I mean, rather than being a cozy sitcom, I think it tried to show a slightly more almost realistic view of the threat lurking on the other side of the channel, which meant people were going, well, you're not getting the funny reaction shots of Arthur Lowe sort of and his glasses in his hat falling off or whatever, so it's difficult to please, isn't it?
And I really like the charm of live recording. I like that 3 cameras set up and the actual live vision mixing, all that. I love all that. It's why I like those classic audience sitcoms. And your more modern single camera shows, I still like certain ones. We love Fleabag, The Office, all that, but it doesn't have the same feel to me. It doesn't feel like a sitcom in that traditional sense. So you go from that to film, it's a totally different vibe. You haven't got immediate audience response for the actors in terms of performance. I love seeing actors, and this happens in theatre all the time, but in sitcom live recordings, when the actors are riding the laugh, when they're having to take a pause because the laugh is so big that they're just having to buy time. And there's so many great examples of it. We did Sorry with Ronnie Corbett. We looked at the whole series of that in one of our episodes, and it wasn't like that's a pretty grueling sitcom to get through. There's a lot of episodes, and it was Brit samey. I wasn't a big fan, but Ronnie Corbett is absolutely exquisite, and he was perfect at that. What a consummate performer
compared to Ronnie Barker. And I always found, because I watched that not so long ago, and I was struck by how the early ones have got this dark Oedipal kind of element to the mother, which was always a bit of a monster anyway. But she's got this unhealthy fixation on him, and then not, like a lot of shows, like a Low and Low, they became a bit more sort of repetitive later on, didn't they? As they didn't have much more material, I think, eventually. But it's something that struck me when I watched it through again. But Ronnie Corbett, I do say people sort of often refer to him as, he was the kind of the straight man for Ronnie B, or the one that kind of kept the audience chirruping along. I think that's not fair, is it? I mean, he was more of a comedian than a comic actor, like Ronnie Barker, and he wasn't really a creator of material, but he was an extremely accomplished joke teller.
The two Ronnies are fascinating.
John Cleese himself said that, and he said it was the best timing of anyone he'd ever come across.
Well, the two Ronnies are interesting because they don't really have that straight man, comedy man vibe, particularly. They're both great comics, and they managed to create work that fulfilled both roles easily. Perhaps that's why they're still popular today. And God, Ronnie Corbett, I mean, when he was doing Sorry, he was already 35, 40 years into a career. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew exactly how to handle an audience. His timing was just impeccable. And Ronnie Barker, I'd happily put my coin down on that. The best comedy actor we've had in the sitcom world. I mean, and just look, the fact that you've got straight up Arkwright and Fletcher just there, two completely different characters, completely embodied. And you don't lose the character to Ronnie Barker. It's fantastic stuff. Fantastic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you've kind of covered some of the things I was going to ask about adaptations which work and which don't. And the one final thing I wanted to say, and I think it's come through in the answers you've given me, is you clearly have experience of treading the boards yourself, and I understand from your colleague Gareth that you've been doing a one-man show. So, Alan, would you like to tell us a bit more about what that was and how it went?
Yeah, my kind of day job is an actor which means I'm usually working as a waiter or something like that. But I am a struggling actor. That's what they say. I'm not famous or established or anything, but I do fringe theatre. And I wrote this last year. I wrote a one-man show, and I've been doing that kind of this year. I'm doing it. I've just done it at the Brighton Fringe. I'm doing it at Edinburgh Fringe in August, the first week of August. And it's a semi-autobiographical. Well, it's what I've been calling emotionally autobiographical. It's completely derived from my own experiences and sort of things that I've been processing as I've got older. And but then a lot of the actual kind of biographical elements are dramatized in some way to make them work more as a whole. It's called Bonding. So it uses James Bond as a sort of framing device. Because it's all about masculinity and toxic masculinity and that sort of thing. And really it's about what we think of as being a man and how that changes. It changes on a daily basis, basically. But you look back on your life 10 years ago, or I do anyway. I look back 10 years ago. God, I wouldn't say those things now. I wouldn't do those things now. And some of that is cultural change. People feel more empowered to speak up against certain things, little everyday bits of sexism that we kind of just passed off as nothing once upon a time. But now, people feel empowered to talk up against them. But also, we as people, we change to fit into the society we're in. And my life has changed considerably. I was brought up in a working class northern town mining village. Basically, it was built to house the miners. And then I kind of went to grammar school and became a lot more middle class and got a university education and all that sort of thing, and moved to London. And like my life has changed completely in 20 years. And so the play is about that. It's a character that was essentially going through that journey in a slightly different format. Obviously, like I say, it's fictionalized, and the conflict that causes between internally in terms of this sense of like, oh, when I was 18, I thought I was going to be this. I was going to be this type of man, and now I'm this. And it's a totally different thing, and that's okay. Ultimately, the message of it is kind of, yeah, that's fine. That's all right. Our idea of what masculinity is totally different. And it uses James Bond as that kind of way of marking that. For 60 years, James Bond has been in film. But the Sean Connery Bond is totally different to Pierce Brosnan Bond, who is different to Daniel Craig Bond. It changes to fit the kind of times that they're in. And so I really like that, James Bond is this embodiment of a man, but that changes, and that's okay. We can change as well. We don't have to hold on to these old ideas of toxic masculinity.
Yeah, when you look at Dr. No, people go, Sean Connery's like the icon of masculinity, and why can't the new Bond be like that? But then, we don't talk through a cigarette, or like he did, and sort of, we can't really get away from Roger Moore was Mr. sort of martini sort of sipping sort of glamorous 70s beauties type of Bond, and so that but each, as you say, it's almost like he's like sort of Doctor Who but with masculinity in film, isn't he? He sort of regenerates and keeps changing and
you have to you got to fit within the times, because otherwise people wouldn't go and see it. And it's not purely responsive. Art imitates life, imitates art, and that's the way it goes. You couldn't just do a straight adaptation of a 1950s James Bond novel. You couldn't do a straight adaptation of Fawlty Towers now. Could you? Maybe you could, and do it as a play. But you watch Fawlty Towers the play, it's a nostalgia thing. It's got, okay, this is set in the 70s. If you wanted to do a modern day remake, if John Cleese ever manages to pull that together, it would be totally different. Here's an interesting note about Fawlty Towers the play. That famous speech by the Major, the one where he's dropping the N-word and other things.
The N-word and the W-word,
yeah, which, and I'm with John Cleese. I think in the context, it's showing this bumbling old fool who is, the younger people are going, oh, God, look at what Granddad's saying now. In the same way, you could do that now. The language would be different, because the old bumbling old racist gammon now is different to the one in the 1970s. But when I was watching Fawlty Towers, the play, that scene came up and the Major starts that speech and then kind of it cuts short. But I was thinking for a moment, like, is John Cleese going to make a point here by making sure this stays in? But even John Cleese knows you can't do that these days.
He was giving interviews, wasn't he, to is it GB News or something like that? He was sort of going on about, sort of defending traditions of say what you want and be shocking, and sort of that shouldn't change. But it seemed like he may have had a change of heart on it, doesn't it? Because
there's lots of words you couldn't say in the 70s, and guess what? They don't say any of them in Fawlty Towers because the BBC wouldn't have let them. So just because the words have changed, he's not dropping the C word when he's talking about Sybil, is he?
Yes, and Monty Python was always. I always got the impression that, as you say, it was a much more heavily edited and tightly controlled production. Whereas Monty Python, I mean, if you look at it now, it's you think, even if they were being ironic, the things they were getting away with in that are incredibly shocking. It was actually, a bit like South Park now or something, isn't it? Trying to shock, but it was a studio-based sitcom, as we've discussed. People expecting it to be all, no holds barred. I mean, as you say, in the 70s, they knew where to draw the line, didn't they, even then?
Yeah, I mean, that's it. Times change, like our standards change. And I don't think there's any problem with people standing up and going, hey, whoa, let's not change everything. Slow down. Because that's the whole point. It's the push and pull of culture. We don't, because if we did just go, okay, you know what, 18-year-olds can run the world and they decide what goes, because then we'd have it go too far the other way, or would it, or would the problem is that if it goes too far one way, then people start to lash back at the other side. But that's fine. That's kind of the whole point. That's why Monty Python in the 60s was this anarchic, groundbreaking thing that was smashing the system. But John Cleese saying the N-word now is not going to smash the system. It's not the same thing. That is not the same. And he knows that, he knows that, which is why he's not doing it. But I get it. And Rowan Atkinson does a lot of this as well. He comes out and say, oh, comedians need to be free to say what they want. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think not just because we want sort of a freedom of artistic expression and that sort of thing, but also because comedy is a way for us to deal with traumatic incidents. But you need to understand the context. I think this is a Frank Skinner joke, if I'm just going to sort of paraphrase it, but he says, you have to be careful what you say on stage because you don't know what people are dealing with. He says, a friend of mine, his parents died in a car crash swerving to avoid a chicken crossing the road. So you can imagine the trouble he had. So, there's a joke you might make, but if you knew it was going to offend the person who stood right in front of you, you're not going to say it. And the problem with TV is that it's a broadcast. You're putting it out to the world. Or if you put something on Twitter, it's going out to the world. You have to be aware of everyone that's going to see it. And that causes all sorts of problems that we've never had before. And we're still going through a kind of cultural process of figuring out how we deal with it.
I think that's why I'm kind of in favour of trigger warnings. I know people, sort of say, oh, it's all nanny state, oh, it's, too many restrictions. But whilst I'm not a fan of the overly censored approach where you look at something and it's like half the length and you think, oh, they've cut all the funny bits out, but they didn't even tell us. And they think, well, we are grown-ups, put it a bit of time when people can see it. But at least the trigger warnings give a chance for people to then exercise their own judgment if they would like it or not. And if they still choose to watch it and then it's offended, then it's a problem for them, really, I suppose. But do you remember that business? Just my final point, I suppose. Roy Chubby Brown, the rather adult stand-up comedian. Do you remember that business? It was a few years ago, wasn't it, where he was performing again in a town hall or somewhere, and it was there was a lot of controversy about should he have the right to basically do his act, which I'm not personally a fan of, if I'm honest. But it's to things like that. Some people try to say no, not at all. Other people look, if you like it, you're going to go anyway, or you want to watch it anyway. So it's difficult to stop it. But I mean, there's going to be no adapting people like that, is there? With a comedian like that. So,
well, yeah, I mean, Roy Chubby Brown, he had his audience, he had that core audience, and they're going to go and see him. Yeah, okay, fair enough, But also, Roy Chubby Brown, he was never on TV, or he was twice, and like said something too blue, and they cut him off. And so even in his own time and context, he was too much. And all the other comedians, they knew how to work the clubs, work blue, and you go on TV and you don't work blue. You had your two acts, because you need to tailor your act to the audience you're dealing with.
Yeah, Jim Davis.
Yeah, the northern club circuit is totally different, and the problem with that is, TV gets you an audience like that is totally different. Kids are going to be watching it if it's, that's why we have rules about certain things you can say at certain times. And yeah, like you using, like I saw, for example, I watched an episode the other day of Till Death Us Do Part. And no, I'll tell you, like, it was In Sickness and in Health, but Alf Garnett, and it came up with just as it started on UK Gold or whatever it was, it said this show, it has uses words of its time, or whatever the warning that they use, just kind of a little trigger warning. And it was I think that's fair enough, because if I'm watching Fawlty Towers and the Major says the N word, I can mentally put it into context, I understand it. But what if I'm 18 years old, I don't know what this is, and I've just chanced upon it on TV? Suddenly, like, that's like, what the hell is this? Is that what's going on? Also, what if I'm a black person and that word is much more triggering to me because it's used as a very violent insult on a kind of daily basis? Even in that context, it's relatively innocent. That's still gonna have an effect, and so that's why words can harm. We have to just accept that, and this is not new. This is, like I say, Monty Python in the 60s was breaking all sorts of taboos. But they weren't effing and seeing all over the place, were they? Because they weren't allowed. There's absolutely no place for that on TV. But yes, I mean, you do. You can get that on TV now. You do get that sort of stuff, but at an appropriate time, and in a context in which we understand what is going on.
Okay, well, I think that's all I have for tonight. So yeah, thanks, Alan. That's been very entertaining.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah,
any sitcom you want, you can do a West End stage version of it. What's a good one to throw at? What do you think? Because you got Only Fools and Fawlty Towers. I mean, if you're picking out the big names that are really going to grab an audience, go on. What would you have?
Likely Lads, I think, because you could. I still think that could be adapted, because when you look at the original 60s one in black and white, which you don't really. I don't think they had all the episodes retained, did they, unfortunately, for that? But you see it was already a very good sitcom, because you've got great writers, great actors. And I think they did a brilliant job of adapting it to the 70s by making it sort of central about these are the same people, but they've been through quite different life experiences. Now they're back in the same place, and that was almost part of its unique selling point, wasn't it? It was taking actors that we kind of vaguely knew, who were just sort of lads up in Newcastle. But the question is, I suppose, how would you do it? Would you do it chronologically? So you've got like the two of them in an old age people's home, like they're going to do with Rick and Edmondson, were going to do that, weren't they, with their young ones and bottom characters? But I think that could work, because, I think.
I mean, I like that. The Likely Lads would work so well as a little fringe theatre production, because you basically 2 actors, probably 4 actors, get a couple of women in there as well, like the wife and whatever. But you could. That's just a very simple. You could do that entire thing in a living room or in a pub, have an hour and a half show. I don't know if it would work on the West End, but
I think it's something I think that everyone could relate to, is that knowledge about the passing of time. If you're very much based in a community and that's where you go back to, you do see things change, close down, get knocked down, and stuff like that. It was all about change, and do you embrace it and do the best you can with it, like Bob, or do you sort of just regret it, like Terry. So that's why I think that would work. As you say, you could do it as a low rent production, and then just to build up time. Which one would you adapt then, if you would have the opportunity?
If I think I want something that's quite you can go big with, I say Heidi High, because it lends itself to a musical really well, for obvious reasons. And I think you could just go completely big, over the top camp, holiday camp, and and absolutely, they just go crazy with it. And I think there's enough nostalgia for Heidi High, and it's not bad on the scale of it was a different time. When we rewatched Heidi High recently, it's like, okay, there's nothing too bad. I mean, there's nothing racist in it because there's never anyone who isn't white in it, so it never has to deal with that issue. Because it's, I mean, obviously made in the 80s but set in the 60s, so I think it's aged pretty well compared to, say,
if you're going to do a musical, I think you could have, like, it's a bit like what was that Rob Brydon series where he's a taxi driver and he's the way he sees the world is more optimistic than it is, and you could almost have Peggy's fantasy version of her life against the mundane reality of this, single, downtrodden girl who just wants to be an entertainer and make people sort of laugh and have a good time. And I think there'd be a very sympathetic angle, wouldn't there?
See, that great. See, you're on my level. You're straight away. You're creating a new narrative. You're not thinking let's do the highlights. You're creating, like, this is the Peggy Ollerenshaw story, and it's her entire fantasy life. I like it though. I'm on board. I'm there, and everyone gets together to create a musical of her life.
But we'll have to make sure we get the permission of the writers. Was it Jimmy Perry and David Croft, is it?
Yeah, that's right.
I think it was them, wasn't it?
I mean, they're all dead now. Who did you get permission from now? Yeah,
exactly. It's sad, isn't it? There was some wonderful comedy writing teams. Well, thanks, Alan. Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed that. I think we covered a lot of different areas there.
Great. Thanks. Do please, anyone who's interested in sitcoms, go and listen to the British Sitcom History podcast, available on all the podcast places and on YouTube as well. Search for British Sitcom History.
Brilliant content there. I've seen half of them. I'm now going to go and watch the other half, so to speak.
Excellent.
So, yes, thanks again. And
thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And any viewers, I hope, have enjoyed this. And obviously send a comment, like, subscribe, and I'll obviously put the link to Alan's British Sitcom History site in my in the attached bump. And take care.
And if anybody's in Edinburgh in the first week of August, come and see Bonding at the Pickle Studio, Riddles Court, just off the Royal Mile. Got my plug in.